We are officially live. I'm excited to dive into another pre-symposium panel. This is the lead up to our executive symposium on April 17th, so in a little over a week from today, on the topic, building a clear vision that drives execution. So in our pre-symposium panels, what we do is we bring leaders who are going to be at our executive symposium together to share their insights, their experiences, their wisdom, their mistakes on their experiences going through building a clear vision that drives execution. We've got three great leaders here with us today. We've got Matt, we've got Suzanne, we've got Dieter here to share their insights on what they found to be effective when it comes to building a clear vision that drives execution. And like I said, this is the lead up to our executive symposium on April 17th in Houston. We're hosting the event at Porsche of River Oaks. If you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I'd love to meet these great leaders, or I'd like to come to the event, I will post the RSVP link in the comments on this video. But Matt, Suzanne, Dieter, thanks for being here. Matt, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Matt Steinbrecher, based in Austin here, and CEO of a small consulting firm that does payment processing for e-commerce businesses called Sound Commerce.
Very cool. Suzanne, how about you?
Suzanne Frawley, I lead talent management. I'm based in Houston, and the company that I work for is really has 9 subsidiaries, does a lot of upfit custom work, especially of the transportation manufacturing area.
Very nice. And then Dieter, how about you?
Dieter Schultz, and I'm located in Houston, Texas, Associate Director at Capgemini, specifically in our energy practice.
Very nice. And I'm Garrett Mintz. I am the founder of Ambition in Motion. At Ambition in Motion, our vision is a world where the vast majority of people are excited to go to work. When they are there, their expectations meet reality, and when they come home, they feel fulfilled. And we believe that starts with leaders, because leaders create the experiences employees have while at work. And so we create technologies and communities to empower leaders to be their best selves for their teams. And one of the ways that we build community is through executive symposiums and bringing people together to share insights, challenges, wisdoms, vulnerabilities, just areas that they like to be improved in a safe place where they can learn from those insights and learn from other people working through those challenges. So let's dive in. Topic for today, building a clear vision that drives execution. I think the first question I'd love to kick off to you all today is, what are some change initiatives you've implemented within your organization, and what worked and what didn't work? What were some of the highlights of, like, when we did this, it totally worked, and when we did this, it fell kind of flat? So who wants to kick off first?
Oh, I can jump in.
Yeah, jump in, Susan.
I'll say past experience. I'll start with, I'll call it lessons learned. I do a lot of leadership development, and what I've learned along the way is even though you have conversations and you find out what the needs are, and you go and you're little expert talking to all the other leadership development gurus that you have and that you're working with, and you come out with this fantastic program and you start to implement it, there's always been pushback. And the pushback is because those leaders weren't involved along the way, as you were building the curriculum, as you were building the journey. And the pushback is they didn't feel heard. And so what I've changed because of that, and I'll say call it the past 5-7 years, is that I get the needs, but then I work with those leaders to say, did I hear you right? It's that whole socialization along the way, and also making sure that, I'm taking into account, what kind of constraints, because they'll have additional requests and thoughts as you go along. And what I found when I do more of that upfront work with the leaders, then when you go to implementation, it's extremely easy, and they're clamoring to be a part of it.
Very nice. Okay, very interesting. Matt, Dieter, how about you both?
Yeah, Suzanne, I love where you started there. And just to add a little bit, I think the why behind the change requires so much attention on the front end. And that why actually has multiple perspectives. You have the why of your team, how that may impact your team directly, and then you have other stakeholders that are outside of your team. That may be customers of the business. It may be other organizations within a broader corporation. It may be teams that typically have not worked together in the past that now may have to. And if you don't take enough time to really articulate the why and consider a few different perspectives, I think you can very quickly lose people because they want to push back. And what I have learned, when people push back, there's not only one person that pushes back, there's multiple people. And those multiple people sometimes agree, sometimes they don't. Now you've opened up all these dynamics of, do you have people that in your own organization that are working against you? And that is not the intent of anyone. No one wanted to go into work today and say, I want to work against the people that I work with. And you find yourself in that arena. So here is something I've learned by explaining how what I just said didn't go right. I think it's so important that you reframe when someone says we can't do something. Are you identifying a risk that we need to be aware of? Is this a risk management item? Is this a you personally don't agree with this item? Or is this just you're always going to be someone that's really late to adopting on the change curve? I think as a leader, it's really important to put attention to how you want to navigate that and set that up really clearly each day. And so it's that reframe part too. Really reframing, is this risk management? Or are you just never getting on our ride?
Matt, how about you?
Yeah, I think incentives are big. The why is important, right? But the incentive to not only the individual, but the team is kind of what drives everyone, I think, as humans. So and I guess that's part of the why, but like, the why is great, but if we say why because I said so, no one really does it. It's kind of like this is what we're all achieving towards. So it's kind of like an incentive, but also a framing. Instead of, hey, can you do this so we can achieve this goal? It's like, if we achieve this goal, we're able to do X. And that small framing change with some sort of incentive behind it doesn't necessarily need to be like a monetary incentive, right? You can't be throwing out bonuses every week for doing a small project. But, something easy, right? That like, if we achieve X, everyone's life will get easier because we're going to be implementing this new software as a team that makes everyone more efficient over, X amount of time. So everyone's going to save 2 hours a week ultimately, because that thing that you hated doing where it was all manual keyed entry, we're automating that with this new software. So we're all going to learn it and we're all going to implement it, and everyone's going to follow this new standard procedure. But as a result, you get 2 hours of your week back to do whatever you want. And that's like an incentive for a lot of people, right? You work less, you make the same amount of money. You can use that if you want to work on something else, or you can coast for 2 hours a week. I don't know. Random example off the top of my head, but I think the incentives and the framing are ultimately what drives a lot of it.
I like it. Those are all really interesting points. Dieter and Suzanne, I definitely think yours are both aligned. But Matt, I want to talk about yours first. When you say like making sure the incentives are aligned, and that you get people to buy in early, for whatever reason, the first thing I think of, do y'all remember hero pay for like grocery store workers back at the first part of COVID? Remember, just people call it, oh, hero pay, we had our heroes coming out. By the way, I'm not denigrating the concept of hero pay, but we needed to have a higher pay rate because there was a lot of unknowns. It was the early part of COVID where everyone was very concerned about what was going on here. And so the question I have is, Matt, or really this is for the group, whenever we're trying to get anybody to adopt a new change, and kind of this follows on Dieter's point of like, hey, if we've got like some like laggards, like late adopters, or people that are inherently resistant to change, do we ever need to create a hero pay sort of temporary solution that gets people over the hump of adopting change? And if so, what do you find to be the most effective way to implement that? Yeah, I'd be curious to learn.
I think, and what I hear Matt saying, he's talking about it's that emotional aspect. When I said, people want to be heard, it's they feel like they haven't been included and really I have to start with that. And any type of change, what I found is that how do I make it seem like it's not that much of a change, or, really take into account what's going on inside their heads. And one of the people that I like to follow when it comes to change is Dr. Britt Andreatta. who talks about the brain and how it's wired to resist and what parts of the brain are wired to resist, and taking all of that into account before you do any kind of change, mapping, what's the problem you're trying to solve, what's the why, all of that rational part. But you've got to figure out what's going on emotionally first and how you're going to emotionally lead them through this, and how do you make the destination clear and how do you make it just as simple as possible to get there. An analogy that I've used, it actually comes from Chip and Dan Heath. They talk about the elephant and the rider. And their analogy is the elephant is emotion and the rider is rationale. And no matter how much data and rationale and information that you give people as to why you're changing, if the elephant's stampeding, you're not going to get them under control. So you have to take both into account. So you have to make that destination very clear and the path simple and really appeal to that heart aspect as well.
Matt, Dieter, what are your thoughts?
I like that Matt brought up a very different angle, so it can open up a little bit more civil discourse in this call. And Matt, I really want to hear how you've navigated. You create more capacity in someone's day through efficiency, through change. And the response that people had where they didn't become defensive of, oh, are you trying to get rid of me? Are you trying to get rid of me? Because that efficiency, more often than not, I have faced they're trying to make people redundant. Oh, they're trying to find a way to squeeze every penny out of what we're doing. And it might save me a little time now, but they're going to find a way to consolidate after that. So I would love to hear how you manage that, especially on the emotional side. Like, let's leave logic out of it. Emotionally, how did you handle this?
Yeah. Well, first I tell them they're getting fired and replaced by AI robots, but no, the reality is, like, it kind of comes back, like, Suzanne, what you were saying, right? Play into the emotional side. The one thing I do as a leader that I think helps me navigate building the team, managing the team, effectively, like, not micromanaging, but putting everyone in the right places based on their strengths and weaknesses, is understanding every single individual contributor and other departmental leaders too, right? But, like, what is your superpower? What is the one thing you are very, very good at, that you enjoy doing, that you're very good at? Now, you identify that across leaders, department leaders, whatever, right? They could be managing hundreds of people. They could be managing themselves. Once you figure out what kind of their superpower is, you then also ask them, what are the things you hate doing, right? Now, they won't always be like, well, I hate this part of my job, because, people vent. Sometimes some others don't. They'll just be like, oh, I love everything. It's great. So you kind of have to extract that from them in one way or another. And as a leader, it's your job to understand the human on the other side, to pry those important tidbits of information so that you can figure out, like, what does this person hate doing? What are they very good at? What's their strength? Now, just from a general management perspective, if they say this is my superpower and you're looking at them and being like, that is not your superpower, man, you have one of two options, right? You can say nothing, and ultimately that employee is going to burn out. Like, they'll fizzle out, they'll become redundant when they're unable to contribute at a higher level on that superpower side and they can't level up. Or you just let them know, hey, you think this is your superpower. I don't think you're quite there yet as your superpower. I see this as your superpower. And sometimes it'll unlock something to them and be like, I never thought of it like that. Okay, great. That's what I'm really good at. I want to focus on that. Let me get better at this superpower, not what I think I'm good at. So those are kind of the first two things to set the frame of that. When it comes down to people pushing back and thinking that they're becoming redundant, when you're maximizing efficiency across the team, I start with that, what's your superpower type of conversation, to then flip it into, great, you're really good at this. Let's get 80 to 90% of your work week or whatever on your superpower. So you just do what you love. You do what you're really good at. You do what your superpower is. And then I have other people on the team that can do all the crap that you don't like doing, because that's their superpower. And now, as a leader, I'm able to see, like, this person plays offense, this person plays defense, right? Like very easy sports analogy. You have to have all those different people on the team. And sometimes there'll be overlap or whatever, right? And you have some players that'll just do a spread of everything. They're kind of your Swiss Army knife. Like, but the way that I always frame it to people is like if we're maximizing efficiency and we're cutting down on time, we're not necessarily making your role redundant. We're allowing you to focus more on your superpower. And so that's the best way that I've always done it. And ultimately it resonates super well. Now, if you are actually creating something that eliminates someone's superpower entirely, then you have to have either a very frank discussion of, okay, yes, like this is what you do, and you're a cross-departmental function that's now going to be automated through software because it's way better than all of it going through your email between hundreds of people every day. But maybe you run that software. You're going to onboard this software. You're going to manage it. You're going to work with the development team or IT or whoever is actually implementing the code of it and the connections of it. You're going to be the one that oversees this. Is that something you're interested in? If they're not, they might not be. Well, now you have a harder conversation about a transition into a different department or role. But a lot of the times you're now empowering them to do less manual effort and own something that's now theirs. If you're automating it through software or, whatever. So a few different flavors, right? It totally depends on the situation, but that's in general how I would look at it. And that's where you play into the human element. I think like as a leader, 100%, you got to play into the human element. So yeah.
I'm going to ask a question because I know there's a lot of people like, I think like in a high level, very transparent organization, these sorts of things work. But I know there's a lot of leaders that are in scenarios that are really tough right now. Like, in fact, I know a bunch of leaders where they're in this kind of like, they know the organization is going to be culling the crop and a reduction in force is going to be occurring sometime over the next handful of months, but they still need these people to work really, really hard up until then. And then once that like drop dead date happens, it's tough. And so, part of me, it makes me think about like the end of Dumb and Dumber when Jim Carrey's like, "What happened to all that 1 in a million talk?" And you realize the girl he's been going after has already got a boyfriend or a husband or whatever. But it's me being silly. But the point I'm getting at is, how do you handle a scenario that's inherently difficult like that? Because I know a lot of leaders are thinking about this and they're thinking about themselves like, okay, I already know the plan is we're gonna have to lop off half my team, and I know exactly who's gonna get lopped off. But if we don't get this work done over the next 3 months, like at our current efficiency pace, like it's going to be bad. And so therefore we have to keep moving. How do you handle a scenario like that? It's a really hard scenario because we're not sociopaths, we're humans and we care. There's empathy. We're like, we're about to have a major impact on your livelihood. Someone says, "Oh, I'm about to go out and pick up a new pickup truck." You're like, "Ah, you should do that." So what if I don't know, how do you handle scenarios like that where that unfortunately the organization is just saying, "Hey, we've created these efficiencies. This role is now obsolete. We don't have another role to backfill, and unfortunately it sucks, but we're gonna have to move in a new direction." But all while knowing that for the next 3 months we need to keep people at their peak productivity.
Try to line up what you can on a severance, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, it's not an easy. By the way, I'm not asking the easy question. I just know these
Yeah,
are things
yeah.
people are going through right now. It's hard.
Yeah. I mean, it's a hard question. I've had to do multiple rounds of layoffs over the years in different points of my career, and also had to, let go of a lot of people, things like that. Um, it's a hard conversation to have for sure. I mean, I think to a degree, there's a thin line to toe between keeping things to yourself until you really need to. Once the cat's out of the bag, cat's out of the bag, and it's better that comes from you as a leader versus through the grapevine, right? You don't want everyone kind of murmuring behind the scenes, and then all of a sudden you walk into an all hands call and it's, a Q&A that starts saying, "Well, when are we getting fired? What are our severance packages? Blah, blah, blah." And you certainly don't want to walk into that. It's better, in my opinion, to go head first at it and, take it on the chin, own up to it, say, "This is the situation. This is what we're all dealing with. This is why it's happening." And here's basically what our plan is going to be over the next 3 months. We need all hands on deck. We need to have high productivity. Otherwise, we all lose our jobs. If we are all hands on deck and we have high productivity, 50% of us might be laid off at the end of this. And, you know, uh, generally in that type of scenario, it's kind of like you want to give as much information as you can to be honest, but it's almost like a white lie, right? Like there are certain things you shouldn't be saying to a greater audience on the precipice of something like that, because it is bad management and leadership to overly share. In some situations, in others, it totally makes sense and is warranted. That also very much so depends on the company and who owns the company and the leadership. If we're talking about a publicly traded company, whole different ballgame here. But for privately owned companies, it usually comes down from the president or CEO top down of this is the vibe of how we want to how this is going to shake out and how we want you to lead the troops. So it does kind of depend on your position in that. But yeah, I'd say transparency and authenticity is usually my number one go-to, unless the situation warrants a little bit more discretion and, dancing, let's say. But it's hard. There's no easy way to do it. Sometimes it's just you cut hard and say this is the way it is and this is what's going to happen, and we still need everyone to perform. Again, you can kind of have that incentive carrot if you can. If you have something like a severance in your back pocket, you can just be like, hey, I know at least we're getting 3 months at a minimum. I'm fighting for 6. So for the half of you that might get laid off, at least you'll get something and it'll give you some runway. Plus, you've got a 3 months heads up now. You can start looking for other roles. But just ask that, for the sake of all of us in the aggregate that are in the room together, stick it out and keep grinding for the next 3 months until the time comes, right? I don't know.
Matt, I thought you brought up, Garrett, good for me to go respond to that? Okay. There's a lot of dynamics to this. You get into how companies are structured, publicly traded, not forth. I don't have HR experience, so you're getting this on what's my opinion, not what's the law or protocol of how that's managed. My thoughts on this are there's a difference between the business and personal performance. Like those are different. And if you have individual personal performance challenges, okay, that's something I can go and talk to that individual about. I'm going to move that out of my way now and say, to come back into what we're talking about, let's just assume that it's not a personal performance issue. And now you're back into the macro business environment. When you look at how important it is to have a team that inherently trusts one another, I think that transparency is really important. And if it's a macro business challenge, then it's not personal. You feel it personally, but it wasn't personally you that caused that potentially to happen. So now you can rally around that common, challenge that everyone has adversity against. How do we figure this out? Transparently, we have a higher burn rate than what we're bringing in. This is not complicated math. We have to figure out something to do. And when you're able to have that conversation with the team, I think the long-term outcomes are significantly higher. You may have to make really tough decisions on the short term. But if you can reinforce to someone, this isn't personal to you, this is a bigger challenge, this is beyond our control. Where can we take agency to try to change it, to influence it, to maybe create a new revenue stream? But we only have so much time to do that. We don't have just perpetuity of goofing off. We have to figure it out. I think that trust that you build, that's where you see great teams, companies come out of the woodwork. And you look at kind of that underdog mentality. You're stuck of, if we don't turn it around, we're gone. We're eliminated. This is our last game. This is our last dance. I love that, being able to step into that arena with people that I'm working with and for on a day-to-day. And you can only have that if you have a really hard conversation. I think you can kill a lot more trust short term, and people remember how they made you feel. So if you're making it clear, I care about how you feel, but we also have to run a business. This is an and equation. That's my take on it.
So I'll come at it from the HR side. And having been in an organization that had to cut quite a few individuals and in one particular functional area. And again, it was a business decision. It was the nature of the business. Worked with the leader, and what we did was we're going to be transparent. We're going to tell, his team, his functional area, what was happening and the time frame. And then also say we want to work with you. There are other opportunities within the business. We want to help place you into those roles, provided that they're fit for you. And if not, we certainly want to work with you. We will give you outplacement. You've got 2 months. However, we'll work with you internally. And, at that time, I had the talent acquisition team that reported to me. So I worked with our talent acquisition team to, how do we get them ready for, resume ready? What advice can we give them on LinkedIn? Let's coach them. And so that's what we did. And then I also worked with them as to, what openings were there? Where could we, using, succession plans and opportunities, especially with those, emerging potentials and more higher potentials, employees. What we wound up doing, out of 21 people, we actually gave a severance package to 6. The others were placed within the organization. We found other roles for them. And, just the feedback that we got from those employees was how we treated them and how they were treated. And even the head of the VP of that function was, I've never seen an organization, extend this and really work with employees, and just the caring that went through this. So yes, a tough business decision, but we wanted to do what was right for the people.
I love that we have both the perspective of one. I love that we have the perspective of both HR and non-HR, just because I feel like, one, when you're in that scenario, we're not necessarily always running it by HR. We're just kind of handling it how we handle it in that given scenario. And then we have to face the ramifications if we didn't follow HR protocol later. But I'm glad that we have both sides of the coin here. Out of curiosity, just my own personal curiosity, Suzanne, in that scenario, of the 15 that stayed and were replaced, did they have long tenures at the organization, or like was it kind of like, cool, I'll take this until I find my next job or whatever, but at least it gives me some pay? Or like were they actually excited about the new roles?
They were mostly excited about the roles. Some knew, hey, something else will open up in the future. We did have, we had one gentleman leave because of a family relocation to another state. However, he came back and we were able to reemploy him. There were a few that, did wind up getting, some better offers from some other organizations as business. This was pre-COVID, and then during COVID, and then after COVID, they were able to get some, better opportunities with some other companies. But majority of them did stay with the organization.
Very interesting. Dieter, I want to touch on something real quick. I really love, and by the way, totally agree with you about the difference between personal performance and business performance. My observation is sometimes, I don't want to say, well, I guess sometimes there's a couple scenarios that happen. There's this situation of toxic positivity that a lot of CEOs love to fall into the trap of like not wanting their team to worry about anything. So they're like, oh, everything's going great. We're going to the moon. Like, let's go. And then all of a sudden the team's like, cool, like I'm on this rocket ship to the moon. This is great. And then all of a sudden, bam, ball drops. Hey, we're gonna have to make some hard choices, some cuts. You're like, whoa, what happened to this moon conversation? I thought I was running with the stars here. What's going on? But the issue is that toxic positivity creates a negative situation for the organization. I've also seen on the flip side scenarios where employees are not necessarily, the way I'll put it is not necessarily uneducated. Yeah, I guess maybe uneducated is contextually uneducated. So I've seen scenarios where, let's say, an organization practices open book management. Let's say they got 2 or 3 down quarters in a row. Unfortunately, they have to make some layoffs. Well, when they make the layoffs, people are like, I can't even believe it. I'm so surprised. The executive team's like, what do you mean you're surprised? We have open book management. You could see how we've been doing for the last 3 quarters in a row. Like, I don't know. How could you possibly be surprised? They're like, I thought maybe we wouldn't get our holiday bonuses. I didn't realize we were going to be getting laid off. Like, contextually, sometimes I feel like people within an organization don't necessarily know the context of what does difficult business decisions mean and like how does that actually impact them. And so how do you toe that line of like educating people on what the ramifications of the business actually means, avoiding toxic positivity, and still not freaking people out? Does that kind of trifecta all make sense in that question?
It makes sense, and it's a heck of a question. Um, First, I think optimism is really important. You, you're not misleading anyone. You're trying to create the vision that's inspiring what you're after. And that requires a level of optimism. I believe that. And hard work. It comes with both. You can't just be saying, we're going to do all these things, look how great we are, and then all of a sudden crash and burn because you didn't actually do anything. So that's my first reaction to what you said. Secondly, if you have multiple quarters of quarter over quarter, year over year decline, and people in the business are surprised by that almost feels like maybe a personal performance issue. Like maybe they're just not in tune with the business, maybe because I think you can feel just on a day-to-day, you can feel if you have a lot of resistance to capturing new work, actually landing work, delivering. I think you can feel like, am I bored? Why are we not doing more? And that should almost be enough to tell you that even if you don't have the contextual education to the books, you still get a sense of what was going on in the day-to-day operations of the business. And trying to pull together all the different dynamics that you were talking about, I think is a little bit challenging because you just get in the arena. Like you're in the arena of where you were at. There is a case study though that I would refer to when we talk about how leaders show up and what happens if you don't don't address some really important challenges, both behaviorally and culturally in your company, which I think covers a big swath of what we were just talking about. And it's a book. It's called Love is a Business Strategy. It's something that I would really recommend that leaders read. Uh, it's a real event. It's based on a true story. It's real, and then they help that these authors actually go through helping you discuss and introspect on how are people behaving within your company on a day to day. I think that's actually how I'll conclude my response to you, Garrett, because it's a really, really, really good book.
Matt, Suzanne, any thoughts on this trifecta? And honestly, as you're talking, Dieter, part of me is thinking, honestly, even in the scenario of like what we're describing of a scenario where, we're practicing open book finance and people know the data and what's going on, but then they're surprised when like a harsh decision is made. It goes back to a lack of transparency because at the end of the day, more likely than not, they were practicing toxic positivity because if to your point, if you can feel like you're getting bored or if you feel like not as much business is coming through the door and you're not really doing as much as you were doing, let's say a year ago, but everyone's telling you everything's going is okay and you're looking at the books and like things are not going okay, then there's a clear disconnect. And so even in that situation that I laid out, it probably was this case of toxic positivity of people just wanting to keep the ruse of everything's going amazing going for as long as they possibly can.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
I was going to say that, and it's a great book recommendation, Dieter. I know Mohammed, he's a good guy. But yeah, the words of Dr. Brene Brown, where she says, clear is kind, unclear, not kind. And I think it's a cultural thing. I think it's, an attribute of that particular, that CEO. but you're not doing anybody a favor by, you know, you don't want to be doom and gloom, but you want to be, this is what I can share. This is what I know. I think you've got to be truthful, because the trust, not only do you erode trust with that particular leader, people have that experience. They take that to the next role and to the next organization, and they don't forget that. Even though it's a different leader, they become very suspicious, and it doesn't, it doesn't breed for, positive, I'll just call positive experiences within corporate America.
Yeah, I think like you have a it's a tough position, right? Especially for a CEO to be in, because you have an obligation to the board, and then you have an obligation to your team, and then you have an obligation to yourself, because you're probably incentivized to do both of those sides to do very well. And ultimately what happens a lot of the time is the board will come down and make a decision, and the CEO is the one that has to implement it, right? Um, and of course, depending on the size of the company or whatever, but that's typically the order of operations. And in an open book policy, like, yeah, it should be obvious, but if you're a software developer, even if you're a very intelligent senior software developer and you built the entire software, like you might not know how to look at a P&L statement, right? And actually understand what's going on, especially if it's a larger corporation. Like, it's so confusing. Like, you're not an accountant. You don't know how to look at that. So it's the CEO's responsibility. I always use the analogy of like dumbing it down for a third grader. It's the CEO's responsibility to really break things down and be like, look, guys, this is our vision. If we push through, we will prevail and persevere. But we're hitting a down market, right? Like, whatever's happening macroeconomically, our product or our software or our services or whatever is not selling right now. And therefore we are flat and we're not making a lot of revenue. At some point, the buck's got to stop. Like, we will have to lower our operating expenses, which means ultimately headcount will have to go down. And yes, you might work in the software department or HR or whatever department that you work in, and you're not in controls of what sales can do. But as the person at the top, as the CEO, like, I'm watching what sales is doing, and they're running all the playbooks. They're trying everything they possibly can. It's just the market, right? And there's a market condition. So you can kind of throw the market under the bus, but I think if you're not very honest about what's coming, you still want to be clear that there's a vision and an execution that's being implemented. But I think you do have to be, to a degree, it really depends on how those board meetings go, right? If the board meetings are starting to go worse and worse and worse, you need to start opening up a little bit more to the greater audience of the company at an all hands that basically says, this is our situation, and maybe 3 quarters from now, if we continue on this path. And when you see small wins, call them out for sure, because it'll help everyone understand. But you do kind of have to let everyone know that something is coming. But I think in a way, again, where framing and incentives are super key, the way that I just said that would not be the way that I would portray it to an entire company. But the framing is really important to get that down, and that balance is very delicate. I think the number one way to do that well is open it for as much as you can for some Q&A too, because it does give you an ability to give some authentic feedback as a leader about what's happening. But you do have to be prepared for that and prepare your scripts, I would say, if it's a very delicate situation. But I do think I do think the toxic positivity thing is just what most CEOs, I mean, it's the number one downfall of most CEOs, right? They're just so blind to their own company not actually performing. So I would just say, don't follow CEOs that are only like that, and the ones that are a little bit more raw and authentic with you, whether it's behind closed doors or in a company all hands, typically is going to give you a much better flavor of someone that you do want to work for long term, at least.
Yeah. Adita, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was. And I'm going to kind of combine what Matt and Suzanne said. Because Suzanne, I think you have that snowball effect that happens over time when you keep going through positivity with toxicity behind it. And it's not just the people that aren't there anymore. It's the people that are now there. So they feel what's left of what isn't there. And then they kind of carry on looking over their shoulders. Is this going to happen to me next? And now it just snowballs either within that company potentially, and you have this like legacy toxicity that's really hard to manage because every time now you go through change or have to figure something out, people are immediately going to be defensive and try to protect themselves. Just human nature, emotional response to that situation. But it also goes a little bit more macro back into the business environment because people remember how you made them feel. So now your reputation is put up against the wall a little bit, back out in the macro environment, out with some of your customers or potentially some of your competitors now where some people went. So you just have to be really careful with how you manage that because the short term versus long term trust aspect that you have at play. It takes a long time for a tree to grow and you can cut it down with a chainsaw in a matter of minutes. Like you just need to be very conscientious of that, even though to Matt, your point, it's hard, it's dynamic. You're working through like, how much do people need to know? How much by not sharing, am I actually helping them? It's tough.
And I would say, like, just from a human nature standpoint, I think sometimes it just catches up to a leader. Like, it's not even like they were planning on it or things like they weren't planning on the downturn. They weren't planning on things not going right. And then all of a sudden, they just kind of get caught up and they're like, oh my gosh, we have these serious bills that we need to pay. And our cash in the bank is not looking great. And I just didn't see the future. Maybe my CFO didn't give me the knowledge I needed, or I didn't see the future, or the information was there. Or even if we're like a senior manager or, mid-level manager down throughout the organization, sometimes you're just the messenger, but you got to, follow through suit on whatever's going on. But anyways, Matt, Suzanne, Dieter, this has been a great conversation. Really, really engaging. I think we covered a lot of really great topics during this meeting today. If you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I'd like to meet these three great leaders, come to our executive symposium next week, April 17th in Houston. We're hosting it at Porsche of River Oaks. Topic is building a clear vision that drives execution. I'll post in the link to this video, the RSVP link. But anyways, Matt, Suzanne,